and then we'll have Fanny on as well, which actually, Fanny, I'll bring you on as well. There you go, and then you can speak when you're ready. Rami, your mic is muted. Looks like it's loading itself up there. Hey, good to see you. Here we go, we got one on camera.
Perfect. I'll go ahead. Hi, everyone. My camera is taking a minute to load. Thank you all for joining. My name is Rami Husseini. I'm part of the product management team at Qualcomm, joined here, as Nick mentioned, with our engineering organization, along with our dear colleagues over at Microsoft, who has joined us to kind of participate in this office hours. We appreciate everyone's time. We had a great, amazing attendance at our webinar a few weeks ago, and had an incredible amount of questions that came in. So we thought this would be a great opportunity to invite everyone to an office hours. Think of this as a live Q&A session. So please ask questions. This is essentially the team between the Qualcomm and Microsoft engineering teams here that have helped hundreds of app developers port their solutions to native ARM. So you have the experts on the line. So please do ask questions. And I'm happy to hand the mic over to Fanny for an introduction and proceed from there. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Rami. Thanks, Nick, and thanks, Qualcomm team, for inviting us to this forum. My name is Fanny Krishna Maringanti. I am a senior product manager at Microsoft. I lead our Windows on ARM app developer outreach work stream and our Windows on ARM advisory services. Super excited to be participating in the participate in the Qualcomm session that we did a few weeks back. There was great turnout, as Rami mentioned, and great deal of questions that we are looking forward to answer in this forum. We have been helping app developers build applications optimized for ARM for the past 3 years. We have done this with more than 400 app developers, and many of them are leading apps in the majority of the categories that you can imagine. And we are happy to extend this opportunity to take inputs from Microsoft to everybody who is looking forward to build Copilot-based PC-based applications. And I do have Chris, who is a technical expert from Microsoft, to address most of your questions. So with that, I'll hand it back to Nick.
Yeah, so we decided so this is gonna be a pretty open forum today. And thanks a lot for the introductions, by the way, Fanny and Rami. Rami's working on his camera, so hopefully he'll be on camera soon. But the knowledge is still there, so don't feel afraid to ask any questions. So like I said, we're gonna keep this pretty open today. We do have a couple questions that actually spilled over from the last session that we had, so that's gonna be our starting point, and then we can come back. Oh, good to see you, Rami. So we'll come back, if there's ever a lull or you guys don't have any questions, and answer some of those, and then we'll pick up. And I see we have Chris just joining in here. So I'm going to go ahead and start with the first question. I'll post it in the chat as well so you guys can see it. But essentially it was, if you have some sort of executable file in Windows, how can you see if it contains x86, x64, ARM?
The most straightforward answer for a command line tool is dump bin. If you install Visual Studio, you have it. And if you do dump bin /summary in the executable name, one of the first things it'll tell you under file headers is the machine type. And that's going to tell you what it's compiled against. So whether that was x86, ARM64, x64, ARM64 EC. And I guess to take that a little further, this doesn't just apply to executables. It's every kind of DLL or driver or anything that could be loaded into Windows. And it's also documented as a format. So if you're a developer and ever want to implement, getting that information from a file, you can literally open it. You'll have to traverse a few things in the structures, and you can just grab it right out of the file yourself. So there's lots of options. Dump bin is what I usually use if I just find something and I need a quick answer.
Okay, so we got a question in the chat, our first one. So they're asking, how can you use Torch DirectML on Qualcomm X Elite PC to run PyTorch models on the Qualcomm NPU? So this is a little bit more of an AI question that we're getting here. So we will go ahead and address that, but We do want to, hopefully keep the questions more towards the actual porting of apps. We do have a session coming up in 2 weeks where we'll talk about, optimizing AI applications specifically. So as we get more questions, we're going to prioritize the executable questions like the transferring your code over, and then we'll save the AI ones for later. Yeah. So moving forward, I guess we don't have any other questions in the chat just yet. Oh, nice, Chris. So Chris actually just shared a resource there, so you can go ahead and check that out. And then if that doesn't address, your question, we can come back and.
Code over, you can run your more optimized code there. But to me, the thing as a dev that what I would like to get to is when you get enough of ARM64 EC implemented and you get ARM64 itself implemented, it's really just a short step to do ARM64X, which will let you combine them both, whether all in one binary or with forwarders. And that gives you the ease of just letting other people just load one library whenever, which drastically simplifies other people using it and only slightly complicates your build process.
Okay. And we actually got a follow-up question on that, which was similar to a question I was going to ask as well. But Javelin and Dart asked, so it sounds like it lets you package binaries and libraries that contain both the native code and then for ARM64 and then also x86, right? Is there any overhead for this feature? So are there penalties for using it, or should people use it, in their transition as they're going through?
Yeah, well, I mean, nothing's free, but the compute cost here is negligible, compared to what you're getting. It's really more the cost you pay when you don't do it. So for everything that you haven't ported to ARM64 before it runs, the emulator has to, translate the code. So, what you're doing when you do this is you're skipping compilation time at runtime, which is not going to save you time every time. So, if you're from a performance standpoint, the more you can implement in ARM64, the better. As far as interacting with the system, I will say, on the flip side, if you've got an x64 thing that doesn't need to make any system API calls coming, from an x64 caller, you're probably better off staying out of ARM code. But, it depends on the context.
Okay. Yeah. Makes sense. That's okay. And Rami, did you want to jump in really quickly?
Yeah, just to add to Chris's comments, it's actually been widely used by a bunch of app developers through their journey. So they start off obviously with an emulated binary, and then as they go to full native, they initially start with a release that's ARM64 EC. And I believe that there's even some Microsoft products that are ARM64 EC based due to plugins and third party dependencies, right? So, Fonny, do you want to maybe mention a few that are in that just to show that the breadth of usage for ARM64 EC?
I mean, nothing big like Microsoft Office or M365 apps itself, right? All the favorite productivity applications that you used historically, Word, Excel, PowerPoint, all of them are now compiled as ARM64 EC because there is a very big ecosystem of add-ins, plugins that people love and use. And we want to continue to support that ecosystem. And that's the reason that was the main driving factor where you have the application code which runs near native speed as a ARM64 instruction set while still having those integration points where x64 code can be integrated into the process. So that's a great advantage that you have with ARM64 EC, and Office, for example, has taken significant advantage of that offering.
Okay, sure, that makes sense. So it sounds like it's really write once, run not anywhere, right? But run more flexibly. Is that kind of a good synopsis of it?
The way I see it is in some cases like a step-by-step process. So instead of having everything native from get-go, you pick modules and areas which are like performance intensive and performance sensitive and intensive, and start porting them as ARM64 EC. That would make your application work better under emulation and keep adding more and more modules as you go in subsequent release and go from there.
Okay, so it's more of a transitional support then, right? It's not, hey, I have to write an app that's going to run on an x86 and an ARM, so I'm going to write it in 64 AC. It's more to help you bridge the gap between the two as the ecosystem evolves.
Yes.
Okay, that makes sense. And we got a follow-up question. I think Chris might be answering in the chat as well, but based on the answer about ARM64 AC, it sounds like if you're not using system API calls, the overhead of emulation, i.e. not having native ARM64, is lower / negligible. Is that the case?
No, I was just thinking more of if it's a small code path in your code, you might just want to save the code complexity. It really depends, though. I mean, for some things, the emulation overhead is very little. And in other things, it's huge. A lot of it's going to depend on what your code was compiled to in assembly and how well those specific instructions have a direct correlation in ARM. There's the same, you can do the same things in both systems for a whole lot of things, but it's a matter of, can you do it in the same short instructions? And also, when we're doing that, we don't go re-optimize that Intel code for ARM. So if it wasn't doing it in an optimized way in Intel, like, the whole execution pattern, we don't redo the logic. We make the code execute as it is.
Okay. And you mentioned something interesting too. You said for some things there's a pretty small penalty, and other things there's a pretty large penalty. Do you have a couple examples of those maybe that you could share? That might be helpful to explain.
Yeah, well, I mean, the penalty you get for paying this is for compilation. So, I mean, I liken this a lot to, and it's not the exact same thing, but it is pretty similar. Managed or .NET applications or any other language like that does dynamic runtime code. You end up in a very similar situation here. I'm sorry, someone just came in on my door. Could you repeat the question, Nick?
Yeah. I was just asking, right? You were talking about how there's, in some cases, a pretty small penalty for doing this ARM64 AC, and then other cases there is a pretty large penalty, right? And it has a lot to do with assembly code, with how the instructions are actually translated into the machine code. So I was just wondering if you have a couple examples you could share with the audience to kind of illustrate a little bit more in concrete examples.
Sure. I mean, an example of this that you can easily see if you can find a piece of old hardware is, again, with the .NET app. .NET, particularly in its Windows Presentation Foundation classes, makes very heavy use of interlocked instructions. Interlocked instructions on Intel chips don't have to be on aligned addresses. They don't have to be on ARM64 either now, but for a while they did. And so when you'd have the .NET generate the native code for x64, it would consistently do things like, make interlocks on addresses where it wasn't legal. And so in order to make that work, the emulator had to do all kinds of shenanigans to implement a pseudo interlocked. And so it's just an example of something that's totally, it's not that they're doing anything wrong. It's not that it's bad software design. It's just what code path it hits. The fewer API calls you're making, like if I call a class and I'm grabbing, a property from, a child object's memory, it's going to be very negligible most of the time, the overhead. But the more you do and the more often you do it, the more the overhead's going to be.
Okay, that makes sense. Oh, looks like we have a follow-up question coming on that. Thanks for that explanation. That makes sense.
I mean, it's hard to try to figure out, to differentiate, overhead versus de-optimization. I'm kind of using them interchangeably there, but it's more of you get unoptimized code more so than, necessarily overhead in the emulator room.
Okay, yeah.
So I think that's what adds to the popularity of this technology and why a lot of app developers, to Fonny's point, kind of along the journey start off with ARM64 EC. So for the team that's on the call looking for guidance, that is usually a guidance that we provide if there are library dependencies that, third-party library dependencies that you have or plugins, or or if you have, big complex code, and some of it can run well under emulation, instead of having to go from full emulated to full native, you can kind of go incremental. So that's kind of our guidance there for EC. But if there's definitely any more questions on EC, feel free to put them in the chat. We can kind of cover that in the more depth.
I'll just throw one more thing out there on EC. It's an optional thing for folks, writing their own apps. If you're planning to have your code loaded in other people's libraries, it may not be optional for you. Like say I'm a security company, I have to compile for every architecture in order to do some of the things they do. I'd also add too, once you get the actual compilation set up, using it's trivial. And how much it is to set up is usually not too bad either. But again, it's going to depend on your build system. So I don't want to make promises without knowing, what it'd be talking about. But like in Visual Studio, it's a light lift.
Okay, that makes sense. I have a question coming in slowly. Just going to give them a second. Oh, there goes Beatrice. Okay, this is a question for the audience then. So we're turning the camera around, just metaphorically, right? Tell us a little bit about what you guys are building. We want to know, where you are in the journey, how we can support you, what languages are you using. If you have anything to share, we'd love to hear from you guys. We are, if there's anyone that does want to speak briefly on this, we can pull you up quickly to share a little bit about your experiences. That would be great. In the meantime, while everyone's thinking that opportunity over, we did get a follow-up question, I guess. So when porting applications to ARM64, what are the challenges and struggles that one may encounter when using the lower level hardware libraries / APIs? For example, libUSB. My experience, typically some of these lower level APIs are less portable, with quotes around it, across different architectures and SoCs.
I mean, that definitely can be a consideration, and it would have been more of one if you asked this question several years ago. A lot of stuff has gotten ARM support by now at the lower levels, and sometimes it is messy. Like particularly like graphics or things like that. The way that you ended up having to change the actual project to make it work, it could get pretty gnarly sometimes. But, once that's been implemented in, say, libUSB, as a caller, it shouldn't be different here. I mean, from a Windows standpoint, it's the same code. So, whatever we're doing on Intel, we're compiling for ARM, for the most part. So once you get it working, I don't know that it'd be less portable then, but, from a standpoint of, do you have to port it to get it to work? Yeah, you will have to. Hopefully, though, again, someone's done it for you. If you found one where they haven't, or you want, talk about alternatives, we're happy to talk at Aperture. So let us know.
We have another one coming in. The trickle is starting to become more of a steady flow now. You guys working on anything, while we're waiting for some of these questions to come in? What do you guys have cooking? Anything you want to share while you have the stage? This is for you guys, Chris and Rami and Fani. Crickets.
You're speaking on mute, Rami.
Always tends to happen.
There it is, yeah.
Good question, Nick. As we kind of shared at the start, that we've worked with hundreds of app developers to port ARM native. Some of them that are obviously publicly released and announced include like Google Chrome, Zoom, Netflix, Spotify. And so we do have a roadmap of, app developers that we work with individually that are planning to launch this quarter and next quarter. We at our Snapdragon Summit last week, we showcased a few apps around some of their AI NPU experiences. So for example, we had an Affinity photo app where we did object selection on the NPU.
Nice.
And so think of that as running the AI model that does your segmentation, all running on the neural processor, and you see multiple time faster performance doing that. We also announced the availability of for audio for music type apps. So think of Audio drivers. We did an announcement with Steinberg and Yamaha around the availability of Audio drivers. So if any of your apps have a dependency on that, that is now available. What else did we showcase? We also showcased a Capture One solution where you can do auto cropping and auto color grading all on the neural processor. So a lot of these are going to be part of our next webinar in a couple of weeks, where we really dive into these AI NPU experiences and kind of then show you guys how to implement these NPU features. Obviously, you know, it works best when they're native, and that's the intent of this call. But yeah, so lots more to come. Thanks, Nick.
Awesome, thanks. Anything you want to add, Fani and Chris? Otherwise, we got a couple other questions that I want to bring up. I know there's some chatter in the chat, but it'll be fun to talk about them. Okay, so we did get a question, and I saw, Chris, that you answered it, but maybe you can speak to it a little bit, because it was a pretty short answer. But essentially, it was Devin 3000 asked, you know, we have some line of business apps that are made in older C, and was wondering, even though the app works fine, is it worth it, right? What are the benefits to recompiling for ARM and bringing this to the later version if nothing is broken right now?
And, you know, outside of performance, there aren't many. You know, if you've got a self-contained application that works and works under emulation, you know, if you're not happy with the performance, whether that's the performance of the app or the performance of the system, as I was pointing out in the comments, you can drain more battery depending on the code. But, you know, more often that's a code problem than just how it was compiled. Sometimes it's a mix of both, like particularly if you're using, you know, some kind of runtime or something, that could be something out of your control. But more often than not, when I see slowness in UI apps, it's the UI app itself and a design decision than other.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
I'm super glad that your applications, line of business applications, are, even though they are legacy, they are still working great under emulation. That's the beauty of the Prism emulation layer, right? It takes advantage of. I mean, we have been improving our emulation layer for like 9 years now, and it is at a stage where most of the use cases do work emulated, and with the built-in powerful SOC that comes with Copilot plus PCs, it's near negligible for some of these applications.
Yeah, Devin 3000 just said the same thing. Prism's been amazing. You know, I've had the same experience using it. I have an X Elite, you know, and it's great. No hiccups.
Awesome.
We got another question a little bit further up. I don't want to, you know, scroll past it too far with the chat continuing on. Ferdo had a question about Visual Studio 2024 support for ASAN on ARM64. Is that something you guys can address here, or should we save that for another session?
It's not something I can answer off the top of my head, but, you know, I'm sure we could find the answer. We've got teams working on that. I know the guy to talk to, but I'm not.
Okay. Well, but Rami, Fani, anyone there? Otherwise, I'll save this and we'll get back to it. Okay, I'll save it.
We need to save that.
Yeah. Sorry about that, Ferdo. We know a lot, but not everything.
Well, one more thing I'd like to add to Nick's prior question. I thought it was good where he kind of mentioned that we can kind of, you know, flip the table and learn from the audience here. One of the things the team here offers between Microsoft and Qualcomm is support with any open source library dependencies. We've got a team of engineers who focus on prioritizing those. So if there are any third-party open source project dependencies that your projects have, feel free to either let us know through the chat or reaching out. We'd be happy to help with porting those to ARM native. Most of them already do have native solutions. We can point you to those projects, so those GitHub repos. But if not, we're happy to help with the port.
Can you name drop a couple? I'm curious to know what you guys have been working on.
Yeah, good question. So I think on the UI framework side, one of the big ones there is Qt. So that's a big, massive. Nice. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so that was a big one that was ported and running natively. Obviously, on the web runtimes, we have Chromium, Electron, libceph. Those are all running natively that a lot of the apps use. But Steve, feel free to add others if you remember some, but those are the ones that come top of mind.
Devin 3000, you've been working on some Qt bugs. That's always fun.
Yes. Yeah, this team here is directly engaged with the Qt team. So if there's any questions or you want to connect with us offline, we're happy to help you out with some of those Qt items.
A quick question also, this is not for you guys, but on RB5 Vision kits being available for sale, I'm not sure. I'll let somebody, we have a couple of support people in the staff can comment on that, but since it's not really related to, what we're talking about here, I'll let that, get handled in the chat. And then we got another one. Is there a reference somewhere that is published for open source libraries that have some level of official support and backing from Microsoft and Qualcomm for getting ARM64 support? That's a great question. Do you have anything like that available we can share?
That is a fantastic question. Funny, are you aware of anything? Otherwise, I mute again. Now, Funny, are you aware of anything? Otherwise, maybe we can point them. I think the Linaro website is usually the place we kind of start off, but.
Yeah, I would definitely point them to Linaro's site for sure.
Okay, I will put that in the chat.
Perfect, that's what I was going to ask. Yeah. That gives us something to put together. Sounds like we can get a couple of resources to help the community. So take a note on that one too. Thanks, Chris.
While you're on topic of helping community, we briefly touched about this topic in the last webinar as well. I'm also pasting the link here in the chat window again. Our team, Microsoft Azure, do support a offering called advisory services. If you are interested to have one-on-one discussions with engineers at Microsoft and take some consult with them on best practices and any design related challenges or any inputs that you would need to make sure that you're heading in the right direction, we are always here to offer that service. All you need to do is submit that form, the link I posted here in the chat window. We'll get someone on our team to spend like an hour or two with you and your team to educate you on the best practices. And whatever we did in the webinar, it's going to be a continuation to that, maybe in a smaller group forum where I'm sure there will be an opportunity to open up a little more and ask more specific questions about your application and use case.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing. That's super helpful. Definitely check that out to everyone who's listening in, because it's a gift to the community when large companies have teams like this that can support you. It makes it a little bit of an easier lift when you're developing your application, and there's a lot of experience that you can draw on from there. So definitely check that out and take advantage of that.
I'd like to echo that. I think the service that the Azure team has provided to the hundreds of app developers is amazing. You get direct access to engineers for questions, and it's been super valuable to accelerate development to launch.
I'll do a little personal plug here. I know that the session's about porting applications over, but that's something that I'm on the developer relations team at Qualcomm, and we're really focusing now on doing what we can to support developers as you guys are going through this transition, but also then, as you guys are using our hardware. And so it's things like this that we want to make available. And if that's, if that doesn't meet your needs, because you're working on something else or you just need slightly different support, we want to know about it. That's what this Discord community is for. We're here all the time to connect with you and help you find that support. And then we have these live sessions, and, if we can find other solutions as well if something doesn't meet your needs. So, this is a really big time for us as we're transitioning into this, ARM64 ecosystem with our compute platform. So, you don't have to face it alone if you are struggling through the transition here.
Very well said, Nick.
Oh, we got another one. Okay. Sorry, I'm not paying attention to the chat enough here. So Qualcomm is now supporting Linux 6.6 kernel directly, which is the present and future relationship with Linaro on both Linux and Microsoft. Does that question make sense?
It
think I
makes
understand what the
sense, but
question
it's
is here.
not something that we can answer really. I mean, it's that I know they're actively doing various work streams with us. I can't answer for Qualcomm, but it'd be hard to answer that comprehensively. As far as I know, we're on great terms.
Yeah, I've heard the same from the Qualcomm side. Again, I'm not an expert on this, but I've heard the work continues always.
If there are no questions, I know a couple other topics that come up when we work with developers are around, CI/CD environments, and just the ability to kind of use Azure ARM to be able to kind of automate testing and automate, for CI/CD. Now, Fonny, if you want to add to that, kind of to share with them kind of an overview on that front.
Yeah. Azure is the perfect way for you to create a scalable CI/CD and QA platforms. I think it's been like a couple of years since Azure's added support for building ARM64 VMs. We do have comprehensive step-by-step guide on how to do those VM creations. I'll find that link and paste it in the chat window. If you are already on using Azure for any of your other workloads, setting up a CI/CD pipeline on Azure for your ARM64 porting needs is going to be a really straightforward exercise. And many people have already taken advantage of those offerings, and it's much simpler to get those going than trying to procure. Like, of course, there are some use cases where you want to test have your lab environment set up on a physical machines and in your lab. That's always there, but Azure is always a great option that you should take into consideration when looking at like scaling things.
Awesome, you heard it here. Check out Azure. We're getting a couple other questions now. If anyone has questions on that, please drop in. We'll answer them. But let's see. We got a question right now on. Hang on, let me take it. Okay, so someone's asking. We want to develop a new dev kit for. Okay, so they're looking for a dev kit, right, for a project they're working on. So what CPU family is recommended in this case? They're asking about the QCS 6490. Does anyone have anything to add on that? I would say that's probably a good one to start. I'll let you guys take that one.
You mean for developing a dev board themselves?
Yeah, so they're asking. That's what's unclear, right? So the question is word for word, right? We want to develop a new dev kit for Qualcomm and Microsoft. Which are the industrial CPU family you suggest to look at, right? Then they ask about the QCS 6490. Which is in the RB3 Gen 2 from Qualcomm, and then the IQ6 as well.
I think, Nick, we're going to have to take that to our silicon team to understand. We want to make sure the silicon guidance we provide already has the Windows driver stack ported on there just to streamline it for you. So while some like the QCS might make sense from a feature perspective, if it only supports Linux, the port to Windows would be quite heavy. So let us get back to you on that. So
okay. Yeah, we'll save that one for later. And I mean, it's a +1 on the QCS 6490, right? That's definitely a good dev kit if you're going to be working on any IoT projects, right? It has a lot of power built in, right? Especially for AI workloads, which again, not the point of today, but if you have any AI you want to do, that's a good one. It does only run Qualcomm Linux right now, so that's kind of why it's not maybe a good solution here, but definitely check that out. I'll drop a link in the chat if you guys want as well, just so you can take a look at it. And then we have the next question after that. So this was from Java Linundert. Related to the question about Linaro and Linux, does WSL2 run natively on ARM64 devices? If not, is this something that's coming in the pipeline?
Yeah, it does. runs great as far as I can tell. And in fact, there were some issues with, firmware issues and Linux driver issues at one point in the last year, where there were issues with Linux booting directly on the boards. And so we had to help several customers who were mostly running things from the Linux side, run them on WSL2, and it worked out great.
Mm-hmm. That's great. That's awesome to hear. I've used it a bit. I actually ran into one thing. So there was to support USBs, because that was something that I ran into, and there was an issue with the virtualization of the USB driver on ARM64. Have you guys run into that by any chance?
I don't recall or recall if there's an issue, but if there is, let me know. I'll make sure we're fixing it.
Yeah, well, I mean, I was, it's funny that someone brought up the RB3 Gen 2, because I was running through actually some of that workflow on the X Elite, and it wasn't able to connect the USB drive to WSL2, and it was an issue because it was using a plugin from VirtualBox, and I know that virtualization is not supported on ARM64. Same issue on other platforms I won't mention here, but maybe, I don't know if that's an issue with WSL2 that can be solved, but definitely wanted to call that out if you knew anything about that. We can talk about that later, of course.
I think, the virtual box and stuff will make it more complicated, but, some of the ISVs we work with, are virtualization vendors. So I'm not going to comment on any of them directly, but we are working with those guys and our product teams to expand the capabilities of what can be done on the Qualcomm hardware.
Awesome. So yeah, definitely check out WSL2. I can speak from my experience. It's worked great. Chris had the same response. So check it out if you run into anything, right? You know where to find us. That's what we're here for. I'm going to move on to the next question after that. So again, from Javelin and Dart, I'll get your name right at some point. Hopefully, if you keep asking questions, I'll get it. So regarding Azure, what is the benefit to using Azure ARM instead of traditional Azure instances for CI/CD? So that's probably for you, Fani, maybe Chris. You have the answer, but whoever wants to jump in, go ahead.
Coverage. I mean, I would tell you to use both. You want more test coverage. So by using, Azure on ARM and traditional Azure, you'll get tested running in multiple architectures.
Is there any... So there's nothing more than just platform coverage, it sounds like, right? It's not, you would want to use this one for this case and the other one for the other.
When we're talking about CI/CD, when you get to runtime and operational costs, I'm sure there's lots of things that come up, but I imagine it's also going to be very dependent on the workflows and the applications. So it'd be kind of hard to generalize an answer for that.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. Okay, looks like we don't have any other questions yet in the chat. I am going to share the link. I promised the RB3 Gen 2. So there's that from our Qualcomm website if you guys want to take a look at that. Again, slightly unrelated, but it's there if you want it.
Yeah. I also want to add that I pasted a link in the chat video on the Windows and ARM VM creation steps in Azure. People who are familiar with creating Azure VMs, this should be like a straightforward thing.
And that'll be great.
That's a great way to get started. So imagine just kind of spinning up a VM, running your application through it, profiling the functionality, performance, just to kind of get a sense of where things are, even if you don't have a physical machine. And then obviously kind of the longer term path if you guys have CI/CD environments. So lots of ways to the app developers typically go use Azure for their development.
Yeah. I'll call out as well here because it seems somewhat related. We also have a Qualcomm Device Cloud if you want to check out this as well. You can get access to a virtual instance of an X Elite laptop and test your application that way. Pretty similar, but it's the website for that is qdc.qualcomm.com. Share that in the chat as well. Let me just pull the link.
I know we had some questions from the webinar around, so as a recap from the last webinar, at the very end, we did Mohan from our engineering team did a live demo of how you compile GIMP. And then we did a demo of using stable diffusion to do text to image Gen AI NPU generation on the device itself. We're going to go into details on that in the next webinar and actually go through the coding and all that. But there were some more higher level questions around the availability of fast stable diffusion and the GIMP app itself. So I'm going to hand the floor over to Srini to answer those questions, if that's okay. So I think the first question is, Qualcomm Fast Stable Diffusion works only on self-compiled versions of GIMP, or can release compiled versions be used?
Hi, my name is Srini. It doesn't work directly, so we need a plugin mechanism to interface with Qualcomm's mechanism. So the model has to be plugged into plugin to the main application. That's how it does work. So we're going to show you a lot of details in the next webinar session, how to do that and how we can actually create a plugin and how exactly the plugin works with main application and all.
And just to add, that's just one example of a plugin. At our Snapdragon Summit last week, we did a demo of Blender with ControlNet as a plugin, where you could do you can render a 3D image into a 3D model into a 2D image. And there's a lot of other examples of how you can create plugins into existing apps. So we'll dive into that, of course, in future sessions. So real exciting stuff.
Briefly got kicked out. Did you guys mention when the next session is coming up?
I believe it was in the chat. I think
it was too.
On the 14th of November, I believe, is the link that was shared.
Yeah.
Perfect. So then the next question is, when will we be able to run LLMs using the NPU on ARM? That was another question that was in the last webinar session. Maybe Srini, if you could help answer
that. We can actually run some of the LLM, the Llama 3.1, CPP1 on CPU. We have the instructions already detailed out in one of the WASDocs links, which I can share in the chat window. And also, we're trying to make some provision to run the LLMs on the NPU as well, for which also I can share some links in the chat window. The model generation is the biggest part in that one. That one actually, we have to follow a lot of instructions and all. Once you go through that, the model will be created locally, and then which can be used with any other application and all. So I'll share a couple of links in the chat window. Please take a look at it.
Thank you. Someone just pinged me and said my camera is working or not working. Is it working now? Mine, it seems to be. Okay.
Awesome.
Thanks, Srini, for that link.
I'm sharing one more link for the LLM working with the NPU as well. So you can look at it.
Yeah, definitely check these out. Still, the team's really developing in the open, more or less, on these. So check them out if there's any feedback you have. The AI Hub team, that's a whole other thing we can talk about another time. But they essentially have a huge library of models that are pre-optimized. So as you're working on something, say you're building an app for native Windows on the X Elite, right? You can go in and pull some of these down, and you'll get then NPU support directly on them. Gen AI has been a little bit more challenging, so there's some solutions in the work. That's what Srini shared here with Genie. But I'll let you guys explore those. And then if you have any questions, as always, please feel free to post those in the AI channel. We have people here who can definitely help you get that fixed. Oh, okay. Sorry, I just saw another message in the chat. Yeah, we'll get on that fixer, see what the issue is there. Sorry about that. If we don't have any other questions today, we're probably going to wrap up just a couple minutes early here. Just because I know everyone has packed days full of meetings. So any other last minute questions in the audience? We'll give you 30 seconds to start typing. If you don't see anything, then we'll wrap it up. Oh, something's coming. Drum roll. Pressure while you're typing. Thank you. Thanks, guys. I guess we have one other question actually coming through. Swish. Just a comment. There we go. That's a great question, actually. But do you foresee game developers adopting ARM64? Anyone want to take that one?
Sure, I guess I will. I mean, I would say yes. For most of the major gaming titles, the issue isn't the actual game itself, but anti-cheat, and we're working with the vendors on it because of the way a lot of anti-cheat technologies are implemented. They definitely are very architecture specific, and they have to be recompiled and tested. And more often than not, when a game doesn't work, that's why.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I'll chime in on this one too. So I was recently at Unreal Fest in Seattle a couple weeks ago. I was, of course, supporting Qualcomm, but that was, one of the things that people are asking about, right? So it seems like there's some interest here. I think it's fairly new, right? There's pretty established workflows, but Unreal Engine, for example, runs natively on the X Elite. So that's already a path in for some people, right? So I think you can expect that there's going to be some adoption growing. Of course, gaming seems to always follow a little bit behind the cutting edge, right? Just like ML, right? You have libraries that are pretty established, and so it takes time to make the transition, but definitely coming. I think we'll just have to wait and see what comes of it, because there's a lot of benefits for people. They just need to figure out how to use it, figure out how they want to implement it, and then the sky's the limit from there. Yeah, a Qualcomm-based gaming machine would be awesome, Fixer. We got another follow-up question. See, all at the last minute, right? Good thing we didn't leave early. So all the major graphics APIs are pretty stable and working. So that was more of a question. Are all of the major graphics APIs stable and working? So DX11, DX12, Vulkan.
Yeah, definitely.
Stable and working, I guess, is kind of hard to say for all of it. I mean, I would say it's a work in progress, especially as new hardware is being added. But, do they have a lot of known issues? Not that I'm aware of. If you run into issues using them, go to the link Fonny put up earlier and talk to us at Aperture, and we'll help you figure out what's going on. For some things, particularly with the newer hardware and where, DirectX 12 is going to coincide with DirectML, there's a lot of active work in that area. But I think that's going to generally be the space in a lot of graphics libraries as they adopt to the GPU plus NPU worlds.
Yeah, and just to add to Chris's comments, so definitely the most mature is TX12. OpenCL and Vulkan just released on Snapdragon X Elite. That's the first platform that they became official on. And so we've had a lot of app developers, especially in the creator space, launch native app solutions on DX12, OpenCL, Vulkan. So you could think of the DaVinci Resolves, the Adobe Photoshops, all of those obviously tap into the GPU through those graphics APIs. So, but to Chris's point, if a bug pops up, we're happy to help and support you in any way. But the maturity should be there.
Cool. We got another question in the chat. Oh yeah, from Devon 3000. I think this might be another one to save, but essentially, so sounds like we'll address this one later. But the question was, Apple recently found a way to do AVX translation on their M series chip. Is that something that could potentially come to the X series or Windows ARM? If anyone has any comments on that, feel free to chime in. Otherwise, I think I'll save that one.
I think we'd have to run that by, hardware folks.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So, great question. We're not ignoring you. I'm saving all these questions, I promise. And we'll have an answer to that one as well. Then any other ones? Let's see. On the topic of gaming, here's another one from Fixer. Does QC and Microsoft have partnership and or work closely with Steam for gaming enablement? They've always wondered what this partnership would look like if it did indeed exist.
I don't know that we're the right, folks to answer that, as far as what kind of partnerships exist.
We're getting into the gaming questions now.
Yeah, working with Steam as an ISV, yes, I've worked with them. They've got really sharp dudes, and they're, they don't come for help very often. When they do, it's usually a dang good question.
Okay.
Yeah, Steam, I imagine the gaming team within Microsoft is, I guess they are talking to Steam on a regular basis. And I'm sure ARM's Copilot plus PC is top of mind for that particular team as well.
Yeah, I bet. It's at least running on the XLE because I've done some testing with it. Now, is it native? Can't answer that, but definitely works. So and it performs really well. So again, to go back to the emulation layer we were talking about before, it's definitely, running pretty smoothly. And we got another question actually, which I think is one of the most important questions. We have a really famous question on this channel, which is Team Dog or Team Cat, which we didn't get to. So I want to close on that one. But right before that, so the question from Runaway 97 is it Windows on ARM officially, or is it Windows on Snapdragon? Because I think both of those terms have been thrown around a little bit in the past couple of years in general.
I think we use it interchangeably, but I think it's one and the same. If you ask me, because I don't know what you think.
I mean, at Qualcomm, it's Windows on Snapdragon for sure. I get the Snapdragon in there, right? Devon 3000 has the same answer. So, yeah, I mean, we do use it pretty interchangeably, in all honesty, right?
Maybe the way to kind of think about it is ARM is the instruction set, so that's the ISA that the architecture is built on. What Snapdragon delivers is the actual implementation of the silicon on top of that instruction set, along with its peripheral cores, right, where you get access to the Adreno GPU, the Hexagon NPU, and everything else in addition, right? Whereas the ARM is specific to the CPU ISA itself. That's a way, right? Technical explanation.
Yeah, makes sense. Right? Go ahead. Okay. Well, I think we're going to wrap it up here. So as promised, I just want to get a quick sound off. So huge thank you first to everyone, right? Chris, Fani, Rami, thanks for joining. As we, wrap up, just really quickly, are you guys Team Cat or Team Dog? We have to know for the channel, and I can't hang up without knowing.
Dog.
Dog.
2 dog, 3 dog. Oh, Cat. That's good. I'm really happy about that. We have a full doghouse here today. And, Rain didn't join today, but, we would have had Team Cat representation. So anyway, huge thank you to all of you guys for joining, Fani, Rami, Chris. We have more sessions coming up for the audience, so keep an eye out, right? Oh, I'm allergic to cats too, Chris. Keep an eye out for the sessions. They're all posted as usual in our channel to see what's coming up. Definitely check out the session on the 14th on running AI natively on the NPU, because that's going to be hugely helpful if you're developing any AI applications. And any last sign-off words you guys want to throw in there, please be my guest, and otherwise we'll wrap up. Thanks a lot to everyone else who joined as well.
from Microsoft point of view, I'm super happy with the interactions that we had today. This is probably one of my first office hours. Same with Chris, like live audience. It's an amazing experience, and I wish we do it more often. Thanks, everyone.
Perfect. Thank you all. Appreciate it.
Thanks, guys. See you next time.
Bye.
Thank you.